Okay, so I need to start by telling you about The Room. About 18 months ago now, my mum decided to move house. And being an exemplary child, I offered to help by going and looking around potential places with her. See, my mum hadn't moved house in the best part of 40 years. She also generally tends to assume the best of people. So I was worried that she might unwittingly extend that goodwill to estate agents. What I'm trying to say here is that I really felt like this was a time where my natural cynicism and distrust toward anyone that works in the property sector could actually be pretty useful. It's important to say that my mum was in a really fortunate position. She already owned a house that she was going to sell to buy the new one. It was therefore very much the case that she was choosing to move rather than being forced to by circumstances beyond her control. She was also looking to move to the city from the countryside. This was during the pandemic when lots of people were looking to take advantage of the shift towards home working to move in the opposite direction. While she was unlikely to be able to afford some swanky mansion then, it was pretty likely that she was going to be able to afford a functional, nice terraced house in Plymouth, the city where we both live, without too much trouble. I think The Room was in maybe the second or possibly third place that we looked at. And there was a kind of bonkers vibe to the whole house. Whoever had most recently redecorated had chosen some of the most intense colours imaginable. One of the bedrooms was painted with a shade of purple that was so deep and rich that the only way I can kind of get across what standing in that room was that it was sort of like what I imagine it would be like to stand inside a bruise. But the standout feature of this house, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary friends, I present to you The Room. And just to confirm, no, there are no windows behind whoever's taking the photo here. This is the only window in that room. So without some context, this might just look like bad architecture. But this is much more disturbing than that. See, lots of Plymouth's residential areas were built at the turn of the 20th century, and so their houses have these gorgeous bay windows in both the living rooms and in the front bedrooms. I'm actually kind of sitting in one right now. If you'll excuse my bad drawing then, what's happened here is someone has taken that front bedroom and, in order to split it into two, has built a wall which goes down the middle of the room and then intersects with the bay window in such a way that one room gets the front and left side angled bit of the window, which, not too bad, and the other room gets just the right side angled bit. If memory serves me right, they'd also had to do something weird with the doors so that you could get into both rooms.
Oh. Door City over here.
Yes.
Now, the estate agent that was showing us around didn't mention it, and so I can't tell you for certain that this wall was built by a landlord. But I also know 100% for sure, would stake my life on it, that this wall was built by a landlord. I completely understand that some people might decide to divide a room in two for extra privacy or coziness, right? I'm not coming at this like Randy in that episode of South Park.
What we're thinking here is taking out the wall between the kitchen and the living room to give you an open concept.
But no one who owns a house has the spare money hanging around to make modifications to that house and isn't a vampire is choosing this as an option. What's very clearly happened here is that a landlord has bought this house with the intention of turning it into either student flats or some kind of house share. They've then looked at this massive, really nice bedroom and realised that they can double their money by simply cutting it in two. But then they've come across a challenge. See, the bloody authoritarian nanny state has declared that bedrooms have to have windows so that tenants can escape if the house sets on fire. Unbelievable, I know. Obviously, knocking through an entirely new window and building it into that wall would have been ridiculously expensive and complicated. And so whoever owns this house has deployed the landlord's secret weapon. The bullshit technicality. Because this room, the room, technically has a window. And stood in that hallway, staring in at that weird little wedge of sunlight, all I could really do was laugh. Okay, so my original sort of concept for this video was that I was gonna run around the city to lots of different kind of flats or like houses that I've lived in, and sort of stand outside them and talk about any kind of like weird quirks or that they had, or like disputes that we'd had with landlords while living there. Obviously, I very quickly after I realised that standing outside places that I no longer live and talking about how weird they are is like incredibly obnoxious and rude to whoever lives there now. I also did think and sort of realise that as someone who likes to at least give some kind of conscious thought to what kind of information I do and don't share online, maybe having a decade's worth of personal addresses is probably quite a good way to get kind of, I don't know, credit card frauded or like murdered, you know. So instead of me doing that, I would instead like to share with you just some nice scenic shots of gorgeous southwest England in late summer. So my mum didn't buy the house with the room. This video isn't just me airing some unresolved trauma about my mum selling my childhood home by dunking on her new one. As I said, she was in the really fortunate position of having a lot of agency in when and where she moved, and so she was able to wait, look at a bunch more places, and find somewhere that she really liked and is really happy. On reflection, maybe my reaction to The Room was a little OTT. Because I'm going to guess that most people watching this video have lived in a flat or apartment or house with a quirk. My partner and I once spent 2 years living in a flat which, if you'll again excuse my terrible drawing, was actually the middle floor of a house that had been carved up into 3 different apartments. And in order that the family that lived on the top floor could sort of still get to their flat, our bit of the house had to be made up of 2 separate, completely disconnected zones, with our kitchen and living room on one side of the stairwell and our bedrooms and shower room the other side. Nothing makes you feel more at home than having to get fully dressed to go to your own kitchen. Ripping into Zoopla or Zillow listings for flats that appear to be the result of some game of Landlord Tetris in which they've technically managed to squeeze in all the legally mandated necessities into one place is also a cherished social media pastime at this point. Photos of flats with beds in kitchens or cookers in hallways go viral semi-regularly. Most recently, TikTok was lit up by an estate agent who had posted a video of a house in Toronto which cost 2 million Canadian dollars, and yet was so cramped that they'd had to put the toilet right next to the bed. And in case you're wondering, no, the original post was not satirical or critical in any way. This poor guy's just had his brain so melted from working in the property sector that he genuinely thought that was like an aspirational post. But that's the thing. These posts are normally about houses in Toronto or New York or London, big expensive metropolises. The house with The Room, however, wasn't in Toronto or New York or London. It wasn't even in like a mid-tier British city like Manchester or Leeds or Bristol. This was in Plymouth. A city which I love to bits, but is not in any way affluent and is hardly somewhere that people are fighting with one another to move to. In my experience, the problem with rented accommodation in places like Plymouth tends to be that landlords fail to do any kind of upkeep whatsoever, rather than going out of their way to make weird modifications and cram extra people in. Maybe this silly partition wall was a stupid thing to have spiraled so much about. If this YouTube channel is evidence of anything, it's that I have the ability to get a little obsessive over certain topics. Nevertheless, there was just something about that room, in that house, in that area, in that city, on that particular day, that just made me go, oh, the housing crisis has got quite bad, hasn't it? So one building that I did want to show you is one of these over here. In fact, at one point I wanted to make a whole video just about that building because I find the whole story equal parts fascinating and infuriating. That building is not somewhere that I've lived. In fact, that would be almost impossible. Because despite being completed way back in 2018, the first residents only actually moved in earlier this month. That's a full 4 years later. See, the building was designed as private student accommodation. For international viewers, that's kind of like college dorm rooms for people that haven't managed, for whatever reason, to get the kind of official university accommodation. It was built by a development company, and before building it, they had signed an agreement with a management company who had agreed to kind of lease it from the development company and then deal with all the sort of subleasing it almost to students. When the construction was completed, however, it turned out that some of the rooms, just under a fifth, I believe, of the rooms in the building had been built ever so slightly smaller than had been stated in the initial contract. The management company thus refused to take on the building at all. A lengthy legal battle ensued, which only ended when the development company went bust. All the while, around 350 flats in the centre of Plymouth sat completely empty. Flats which were allegedly entirely habitable. All this in not just the most deprived council ward in Plymouth, but one of the most deprived wards in the entire country. I think the housing crisis is a little bit like global warming, for two main reasons. Firstly, when one sees some horrific disaster unfolding, such as the recent drought in China or floods in Pakistan, it's tempting to try and find some comfort in the idea that these horrific events might, at least, provide a catalyst for politicians to take more meaningful action on climate change. But then, before the week is out, all that's really happened is a previously unprecedented event has now become precedented. The baseline for what is considered shocking or even newsworthy has become just another symbol on the morning forecast. When one stops to think about it, or is suddenly forced to think about it by a badly bisected bay window, some of the stuff that's come to be accepted as normal when renting a place to live is absolutely wild. I've spent whole days of my life gathering documents and evidence and preparing written statements to force landlords to return deposits. I've always managed to get my deposit back, but it is just bonkers that we've just come to accept that moving out of rented accommodation is definitely going to involve this drawn-out, pseudo-legal set of exchanges in which one has to prove that actually that 50-year-old carpet was a little bit worn before we moved in just 12 months ago. In my last place, we had a landlord who was, as landlords go, good. If there was a problem in the house, they would hire a qualified, trained professional to come around and fix it. And we could not believe our luck. You just get so used to problems going ignored or answering the door to some mate of the landlord who happens to own a wrench that them hiring an actual qualified professional feels like some godly act of benevolence. Our baseline for what is normal or good has just shifted to a place where we accept the reprehensible as standard. Secondly, much like global warming, the housing crisis in the global north is just so hard to get one's head around, because there isn't one singular cause. There's the ambivalence of individual landlords to the well-being of their tenants. There's the active promotion and rewarding of landlordism by governments. There's the cultural shift towards viewing housing as an investment vehicle rather than as a basic human necessity. The housing crisis isn't the result of one single thing, it's a result of the system as a whole. Further, it's not a result of a flaw in that system. The housing crisis is simply the logical outcome of our economy working as intended, which means it's hard to know what to do about it. Okay, so I do not have a quick and easy silver bullet solution to the housing crisis. I regret to inform you if that's what you're kind of hoping for at the end of this video. However, particularly with how much worse things are going to get for people over what I think is going to be a really difficult winter to come, with fuel bills soaring, particularly when people are living in houses which aren't very well insulated. I did want to do some tiny small thing. Over the past kind of 12 months, 18 months, I've been doing a lot of running, and it has been really good for my both physical and mental health. But I was kind of keen to, see if I could do something more broadly good with it as well. And so probably just a handful of days after this video goes live, because I am sort of pushing a deadline with it a little bit, I'm going to be running the London Marathon. And I'm going to be doing so to raise money for Shelter. Shelter is a charity based in England that works to support anyone who is facing housing problems. This involves providing legal advice, signposting, and other forms of support to people in a huge range of circumstances. From people who are at immediate risk of homelessness, to tenants who are at loggerheads with bad landlords, all the way through to owner-occupiers who are maybe struggling to pay their mortgage and are at risk of having their homes repossessed by the bank. Back when I was a student, myself and my flatmates found ourselves in this weird position where we were caught in some kind of dispute between our letting agent and our landlord himself, and as 18-year-olds who had no idea how housing law worked, it was pretty stressful. Nevertheless, when we visited our local shelter office during one of their drop-in sessions, they were able to talk it through with us and really reassure us that we essentially had nothing to worry about. It all feels like a massive storm in a teacup looking back at it, but it was genuinely really helpful and important to us in that moment of time to be able to talk to someone who really knew their stuff surrounding tenants' rights, and all completely for free. I cannot imagine how much it means to people who are in genuinely desperate situations. On top of providing this more immediate support, Shelter also put in the work campaigning to change the system itself. Over the past year, and with quite a lot of success, they've been pushing the government to introduce a renters' reform bill, which would, among other things, give further security to renters by making so-called no-fault evictions illegal, and forcing landlords to sign up to a national landlord register to bring some accountability to the housing sector and help tenants to avoid problem landlords. Other ways of fighting the housing crisis do exist. If you're a tenant, you might want to look into joining a local tenants union, who can provide more localized support and solidarity. But if you do want to help me to boost Shelter's really important, vital work, which is only going to become more important and vital as we head through what's going to be a really tough winter for a lot of people, then you can support my marathon running endeavor by heading to tinyurl.com/Tom's Marathon. I'll also put the link in the description and pin it in a comment down below for anyone who doesn't want to type all that out. I know some of you who either follow me on Twitter or check the communities tab have already donated, and thank you so much to everyone who has. That has been hugely encouraging, watching some of that come through. Even if you're watching this after the event has actually happened, I'm pretty sure that that page will stay up for a couple of weeks afterwards. Or if you're watching this far into the future in like 2030 or something, if YouTube is still around then obviously you can just go directly to Shelter's website. My training has not always gone exactly to plan. I've currently got a cold. There's been little bits of injury along the way. There's also been times where I've just sort of struggled with it stress-wise a little bit as well. But I'm pretty sure that I have put in the kind of requisite hours and miles and training to get me to the end of the marathon. I checked Strava a little bit earlier, and it was saying that I had run 1,762, I think, kilometers since the beginning of this year, which is just over 1,000 miles for those of you that do things that way. But even so, you know, I'm under no illusion that doing the full 26.2 in one go, which is something I've not done, my longest run has been 20 miles, is going to be really absolutely brutal. But I think the biggest challenge is going to be psychological, and I think knowing that all that sort of pain and hard effort that I'm going through is raising some money for Shelter is going to make all the difference, and hopefully just let me push on to the end. So yeah, if you would like to sponsor me to do the run, then if you could head to tinyurl.com/Tom's Marathon, that would mean the absolute world. Thank you so much for watching this video, a kind of bonus video, not too long until my next one, proper one, comes out. Maybe a strange one, this one, to recommend to a friend, but if you would like to do so, then every little helps. That would be super appreciated. Thank you as ever to, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to read these off the screen, to my Patreon supporters, Richard, Sinji Nielsen, David Brothers, Alan Gann, Luke Meyer, Gary, Dick on Spain, Bill Mitchell, Al Zweigart, ZC Reese, Shab Kumar, Alexander Blank, Neil de Bildgard, Sophia R., President Dwayne Elizondo Mountain Dew Herbert Camacho, Sergio Suarez, Nicholas Jacquemart, Strange Weekend, Ricardo Fernandez de Cordoba, Richard Rapoon, Udo, Elliot Day, Amit Singh Parahar, Parker Mead, Karen Rosenau, Gabriel Koch, Demelza, Jimmy Dunn, and Christopher Cowan for being signed up to the top tier of my Patreon. Don't go and look at my Patreon for this video. Please go and consider donating some money to Shelter. You can find out about my Patreon in future videos if that floats your boat. But thank you so much for watching once again, and presuming I survive the marathon, I'll see you in a future video soon.